If there's one criticism that I see often with this console generation for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles, it's that it feels like it's off to a slow start and there's hardly any games out there that are true exclusives. The kind of games that are only available on these consoles, thus justifying the purchase of them in order to play these games. And if we're being technical, then that's absolutely true. Game exclusivity nowadays just isn't really a thing anymore, at least in the realm of the high-end console market, that being Sony and Microsoft. Usually exclusivity simply means you can't play this on the competition. Although even that is now changing on the Microsoft side of things, now that they're openly shipping a handful of Xbox Game Studio games on PS5 and Nintendo Switch, with potentially more on the way. But the point still stands. A large portion of the high-profile game releases we've seen so far since late 2020 have been multi-platform in some way. Either it's a cross-generation title, or it's also available on PC. Or there's the expectation that it will eventually arrive on PC, which we can now bank on that happening for PlayStation Studio games. Sony Interactive Entertainment has been fully embracing the PC platform, so even an early PlayStation 5 exclusive like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is now available on PC. So at the time of this video's upload, yes, you would need a PlayStation 5 if you want to play Marvel Spider-Man 2, but as we all know, that isn't always going to be the case. So looking at the list of true PS5 exclusives, we have games like Astro's Playroom, Astro Bot, Demon's Souls, Destruction All-Stars, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and 16, Marvel Spider-Man 2, Marvel's Wolverine coming up, Rise of the Ronin just came out, and also Stellar Blade. There's also some PSVR 2 games in there, but naturally people act like these don't exist, but they are indeed only playable on PS5, so with that said, how is it that PS5 is doing as well as it is without following the formula we all expect from the console business? And let's face it, this console is doing incredibly well. On a launch-aligned basis with PS4, PS5 has been very close. Having caught up from the stock shortages of 2020 to 2022, it's trailing slightly behind PS4, which given the higher price tag and the current global economy compared to where PS4 was in 2017, one could argue they'd be exceeding the PS4 sales pace if not for those things. And beyond just console shipments, we can look at Sony's corporate strategy meetings where the company has put out the console's KPIs on full display, where engagement is higher, spending is higher, active users is higher. PlayStation 5 is a success without true exclusives. So let's break down the why. Number 1, true exclusives don't matter anymore, or not nearly as much as they used to. This always seems to be a contentious topic for many whenever this point is asserted, but we just went over the sales pace that illustrates demand without true exclusivity. And before a game like Grand Theft Auto 6, which will no doubt move the needle further. But the console is doing well right now without games like Horizon Forbidden West, God of War Ragnarok, or Gran Turismo 7 only being available on PS5, and moreover, we have plenty of evidence showing that the availability of them on PS4 hasn't halted their sales performance. Most high-profile PlayStation Studio releases on PS5 have seen varying levels of success, and it was indeed their playability on PS5 that drew people in. Dialing back to previous discussions surrounding this, we've already seen, even during year 1 of PS5's time on the market, that the platform ratio was favoring PS5 for a handful of first and third-party games. Year 1, a time where hardly anybody could buy a PS5, and PS5 versions were consistently matching or outselling PS4 versions. That ratio only grew larger and larger as years went by, and we saw more cross-gen exclusives, cross-gen games, or games that eventually got a PC release. Which, that's another acknowledgement worth discussing. The reality is, shipping on PC just isn't harming the PlayStation brand or stunting the sales performance of these games, as some are quick to suggest. Now, an argument could be made that this is what happened to Microsoft, referring to anecdotal experiences about how they saw Microsoft ship their games day and date on PC years ago, and this made them reconsider buying an Xbox. But we all know this is not the full story for Microsoft and all the missteps they took with the brand. There's a lot that went into where the company is today. So, to stay on topic here, it would be reasonable to say that PC and console appeal to different audiences. Sure, there's some obvious crossover for a really engaged customer that likes to buy and play games everywhere, but most people have one they prefer, and that's who Sony and Microsoft are catering to. Right now, Sony has openly outlined that their major tentpole releases, that being their single-player narrative-driven games, are targeting console first, and then they'll go to PC after a year or two. Herman Hulst, the CEO of the studio business group at SIE, even told investors that they hoped this would encourage people to buy the sequels on console. This might just be more of an answer to quell any fears investors might have about cannibalizing the console business, because I sincerely doubt the company actually expects the PC audience to buy consoles, but nevertheless, we still have this identity of exclusivity for the console business. Plus, Sony prefers console buyers anyway, the kind of people that will own it for more than 5 years, subscribe to PS Plus for those 5 years, buy third-party games, buy microtransactions for those games. They want a high average lifetime spend per customer. And if a PC gamer isn't going to do that, then ship the game on PC, since it's practically leaving money on the table if they were never going to contribute to the console business anyway. And in the case of a live service game like Helldivers 2, you want that game to reach the biggest audience it can. Who knows how successful it would be if it weren't for a PC audience that contributed to the word of mouth that helped this game blow up the way that it did, which more than likely got additional PS5 owners to buy PS5 copies. I suspect there's a day sometime down the road where Sony does ship all their games day and date on PC. I'm not sure when that would be. It could be 5 years from now or maybe 10, but if they feel it won't cut into the console business, then they might get there eventually. So with all of that in mind, we can look at PS5's exclusives again under a more accurate lens, and then you start to see a lot more games. Now look, there's always something to be said about the cross-generation period that felt way too long due to COVID game delays, or that many games are native PS5 versions from previously released PS4 ones, or the fact that consoles don't have these transformative leaps anymore like they used to, making cross-gen releases on what are principally both x86 hardware a lot more budget-friendly for studios to do, but we can see an exclusive release cadence that's been quite strong. They might not be true exclusives, but they're exclusive enough for millions of people to buy PS5s and then buy PS5 versions of those games. The next reason is a more obvious one, but 5 does come after 4, doesn't it? Sony knocked it out of the park with PS4. It was and still is a wildly successful console. There's so much that can be said about it, from the huge PR win the company capitalized on versus their competitor, to the design philosophy behind the hardware, to the fantastic games from their first-party studios. They really did an excellent job. And by all means, none of that is supposed to guarantee success for the next console. We all know how Sony fumbled the ball going from PS2 to PS3, but that doesn't mean they can't pull off a PS1 to PS2. If you have a successful platform and product to springboard off of, then you're in good shape going into the next one, as long as you don't mess it up. Thankfully, they didn't do that with PS5. The pricing was about as solid as it could be by 2020 standards, the controller saw some genuinely interesting enhancements, and Sony stuck to what mattered most: games. The messaging to customers and also their development partners was clear and concise. We've learned from PS4 and we're building upon it. Which goes into our next reason: backwards compatibility. This is always great to have when you're thinking about upgrading to the next generation. It eases that transition by bringing over your investments. And I would make the case that it played a much bigger role during this transition versus others. Most notably, the PS4 cycle saw more and more consumers shift their spending to PlayStation Network. The ratio of digital game sales was starting to grow into a substantial part of the business, and that means consumers are locked in. You can't just sell your library of games to a brick-and-mortar store and take that credit to a different company. So for many, it's a tougher pill to swallow if you want it to leave. Or rather, it was an easier choice to make once PS5 and Xbox Series were here. The Microsoft CEO of gaming, Phil Spencer, made a lot of headlines last year when speaking with Kinda Funny on this very topic, explaining that they lost the most important generation with Xbox One. That was the generation where people were building their digital libraries. If you weren't going to beat Sony then, it was going to be much harder during the next round. Not only is Phil right, but this gets amplified more when you consider that PS5 is just going to feel like a very easy direct upgrade from PS4. All your games come, your save files. You can start logging into native PS5 versions of your favorite live service games and start enjoying those enhancements. Many of your PS4 games get retroactive boosts to the frame rate and load times. You get entitlements to free PS5 upgrades of games you already bought. Even if there were no true exclusives, PS5 was immediately an excellent PS4 upgrade. And that really can't be said about prior console generations. Another reason is that the biggest franchises were carried over. Established IP is a powerful thing to a company. It's why Activision insists on Call of Duty every year. It's why Ubisoft just can't put down Assassin's Creed, or Nintendo with their valuable properties. These are big names that people know and love, and Sony recognizes that just like any other publisher. If you enjoyed any of these names on PS3 or PS4, then it was a big deal to see them all return on PS5. Ratchet & Clank, a Demon's Souls remake, Spider-Man 2, Horizon, God of War, Gran Turismo. This sort of goes back to the games discussion, but it's a valid one. The console has already seen big, familiar names ship. Perhaps a different thing we can examine is that Sony still values experiences that aren't these big AAA games. Sony has been strategically aligning themselves with games like Bugsnax, Canna Bridge of Spirits, Stray, Chia, Rollerdrome, Chicory, or launching programs like the China Hero and India Hero Project, these incubation programs that help independent studios get funding and support to ship on PlayStation. There's so many good games coming out, and Sony has done well with identifying these and getting timed console exclusivity, which some die-hard PlayStation fans will be quick to point out that Sony used to do a lot of these games in-house, like the incubation programs that happened at Santa Monica, or all the bizarre but totally amazing stuff we got from Japan Studio, and I would agree. I'll always feel there's some value doing these things in-house and funding them that way, but at the very minimum, the portfolio at times can feel like nothing changed when the same kind of games and experiences one might have expected from Sony to fund 10 years ago are still happening, and arguably, this is kind of the better outcome anyway. Sony gets the brand alignment early on, the developers get the resources and distribution channels that Sony offers, and gamers win because Sony doesn't own the IP, so these games do end up eventually on other platforms. The point is, if these were the kind of games that you enjoyed on PlayStation, they never really went away. Between the AAA familiar to the smaller scale against the grain type of experiences, and of course new IP like Returnal every now and again, the games are there. Something else we can say that has played a role in PS5's success is how it's basically the default poster child in the high-end console market. Chalk it up to a number of things, but that's essentially what PS5 has been. PlayStation has always had this very strong cultural brand image, and PS5 is no exception. Since launch, it was always PS5 that took up a lot of the consumer mindshare with the stock shortages. There were memes left and right about how the console was so hard to get, its appearance in pop culture was also a common sight, and depending on where you're from, then your parents don't call game systems. They call them either a Nintendo or a PlayStation. A large portion of Europe, that's certainly the case. PlayStation has historically done very well there, and during a cycle where Xbox Series consoles are down up to 50% year over year in some markets in the region, it just adds more to the default image the console has. And Sony has at times been very good with marketing. Not always, but sometimes they can do this well. And PS5's branding has certainly leaned into more of this premium feeling. That much can be said from the pricing on all the hardware and services, but also just the physical design language. Love it or hate it, PS5 is visually striking. It looks like nothing else on the market or consoles before it. It's got a silhouette that's easy to identify, and that kind of stuff does sit with people. Even if you dislike it, you know what it looks like and you never forget it. And it's why that, and everything we've mentioned so far, has led to PS5's success. Which, I want to make clear, some of these things can be argued as more important than the other, or one can be considered a leading contributor, but holistically, they all contribute to where the console is today.